This is Identity at the Center.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff, how are you?
Oh, not so bad. Yourself?
Good. I've been waiting to hit you with this one for a while, so here you go. Jeff Rooney, Jeff Stedman, making copies.
Wow, that is old school. A little Rob Schneider from Saturday Night Live.
Just so hilarious. I was watching it the other day, and I'm just like, you can watch those old SNL clips and just crack up. It's so good.
I think everybody has like the era that they grew up with. And so for me, it would have been like mid to late 90s, early 2000s, like Phil Hartman through Will Ferrell, right? Stuff like that. But honestly, I still watch every episode. I still enjoy it. They're not all fantastic, but there's still some gems that are coming out.
Yeah, I think to your point, like the original OG Saturday Night Live was like trying to think of Eddie Murphy and
Dan Aykroyd, a bunch of other
Dan
folks.
Aykroyd, and like you watch those and you're like, I maybe like you missed it, right? But I'm sure people seeing that stuff for the first time just bust a gut.
Yeah, I mean, there's some good stuff too. But I think I still think like you develop an affinity for your era of SNL. So for me, mid to late 90s is probably where I really first started to like, get it. But I still watch it today. And have you seen the new SNL UK version?
No.
It's really good. Like it might be better than the US version right now. The writing, there's only I think 4 or maybe 5 episodes that are out so far. And it just started maybe like a month ago. They do the same kind of cadence, obviously Saturday night live, but in the UK. And it's good. The writing is on point. The content is edgier. I think part of that is just because of US broadcast rules. There might be some language that we normally wouldn't hear in the US, but you can see it on the streaming services. But I've been really impressed with at least the first 4 episodes have been really good. The last one was a little bit of a clunker, but I'll forgive it so far. But they've been good.
Do you remember that show In Living Color?
Of course.
Okay.
Fire Marshal Bill.
Fire Marshal Bill. And Denise said she never saw that show. And I was like, what? Okay, we have to go on a binge of watching those on YouTube because, I don't know, I watch them again. I watch something like Fire Marshal Bill and like I laugh like I laughed when it was coming on the first time. And maybe that's just me or maybe it's just like the nostalgia kicking in, but I think that show was great. I'll go as far as to say it was on par with Saturday Night Live, if not more funny.
I don't know if I would go that far, but there were definitely some memorable characters. It just wasn't long enough, and it wasn't on long enough to have that sort of that sustained success. I mean, SNL's been around since the 70s, and here we are 50 years later, still going. You can argue whether or not the quality is there or not, but the fact that they've had a show going for 50 years is pretty incredible.
Yeah. I was on a conference call with somebody the other day, and their background was the living room of The Simpsons. And I'm like, dude, they are still making new Simpsons episodes. And I remember that was just like a thing on the Tracy Ullman show. But that was when I was like a little kid. Like, that show is amazing.
Man, you are like really digging into the past. What's next? You're going to talk about like Gunsmoke?
No, I was actually going to, but no, this is my last TV show thing. The other thing that I wanted to bring up is just actually futuristic. It's like AI. It feels like all these releases are coming out, like the latest Gemini release and the latest OpenAI release. What is the latest one with OpenAI? 5.5? And
5.5 or is it 5.7? I can't remember.
It's like, that's the thing. You can't remember. They're coming out so quickly. And if you're like us, you like to try to dabble in all the different models. And maybe you think some models are better at certain things than others. Like, for example, I've been using Gemini. Whenever I have to do any kind of image creation or image editing, I just think it does like such a fantastic job.
You need to check out the new OpenAI image generator because I've been using that for the last few days. The new version of that is pretty good. I think it's better than Gemini's Nano Banana.
Yeah, the Nano Banana. So you're saying it's better. Okay. I've got to dig into that.
Last week or so. I actually used it for the LinkedIn post I made today. So it's April 30th. And I made a post today talking about our IDPro discount. And I, it's clearly it's an AI picture, but it's a newspaper headline. The text is readable. Our logo is on the coffee mug. The URL idpro.org/IDAC is, on the coffee mug. Things look pretty good for that kind of thing. Yeah, that was the new ChatGPT model. It's been really impressive.
Yeah. And now I think probably because we have paid accounts, it's extra good. But I kind of feel like, so here's a good question for you. If you could only have one paid subscription, what
Oh,
model would you go with?
you're hurting me right now. If you had asked me a week ago, I would have said Claude. Um, Before that, it would have been Gemini. Before that would have been ChatGPT. I find that I keep running into too many usage limits with Claude, especially during prime time. That Gemini has kind of become my default backup when I run into usage things with Claude. But I'm starting to dabble more again with the new ChatGPT model. So I don't think you can just pick one and say this is the one I'm going to use. If you have to pick one, just go monthly and change your subscription, cancel, and then as each one pulls ahead, figure out which one you seem to like the best. But yeah, I don't think you can just say one right now and ride it because you're going to miss something.
What do you mean by usage limits? Maybe this is like where I'm like, all right, I'm not hitting it hard enough, but I've never run into usage limits with anything. I don't have a Claude subscription yet.
So I have a cloud subscription. I have the $20 one or whatever it is. And between the hours, I believe their primetime hours are 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. US Eastern time. And if you're using it during that period, you run the risk, I think, of running into more usage limits. And typically it's either like long documents or, if I'm vibe coding up some little app that I'm working on, right? Things like that. Things with long context windows, lots of tokens, basically lots of characters and words and things like that. You tend to run into it sooner. Um, just from a comparison standpoint, I very rarely would run into anything like that on the Gemini side. And I have a paid Gemini account as well. And I have a paid ChatGPT. So just for, and I think part of it might have been just Claude's success over the last couple months and them getting really big, especially with things like OpenClaw and the craze around that. And it's a very impressive model. It does a lot of neat stuff. But yeah, I of the three major services that I use, Claude is the only one that I consistently will come up against usage limits. And they make it really easy to spend money. They're like, it's a little thing that says that click here to continue, and your credit card gets charged, for usage. And next thing you know, you've got $50 extra, and like, oh shoot, why did I pay for that?
Well, speaking of like charges, it sounds like the Chinese models, DeepSeek, Kimi, are the two that I've heard the most about. Are very low cost to almost free. Have you messed with those at all?
Not substantively. I've poked around a little bit, but I tend to stick with at least in the US, the three kind of major commercial models, I would say. I tell you what I
Right.
don't play with is Copilot at all, really. They've kind
Yeah.
of been out of sight, out of mind for a long time, even though they basically just have like a reskinned version of ChatGPT, and now they've got, some of the Claude models in there, but it still seems like it's behind the original versions. And I'm not sure why that is, but that's
But I
just been,
wind up using that a lot because um, our employer, my employer, does use that
yep.
model
That's the
predominantly.
only reason
I,
I use it is just for that stuff.
it has access to our corporate, you know, file shares and things like that. Hopefully, I'm not
Oh, look,
sharing
it's
any private
Copilot for
information.
business.
But I
There are
think
tons of
that's
companies out there that are doing it.
I'm sure a lot of our listeners are in the same boat, and so a lot of I I feel like the security around what's available through Copilot is probably like, hey, you're not taking your private information and training a public model.
I think that's fair. I think Microsoft has done at least a decent job, if not good job, of at least the messaging around the segmenting of how your organizational data is being used and where it can go to within these frontier models and kind of what they're doing. So I think they've done a good job with that. Um, it would surprise me if ChatGPT and Anthropic's Claude and Gemini didn't have the same kind of functionality. I just don't have any experience on like their enterprise, kind of versions. I'm assuming that they do. Otherwise, they would have a really hard time getting any usage in an enterprise.
Right.
But yeah, I think Microsoft is sort of kind of like the enterprise de facto, just because they have such a huge install base through things like Office and Outlook and Azure and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when you're doing enterprise software, your monetization model becomes pretty clear. You sell some kind
So you
of
start slapping Copilot on literally everything, including a keyboard button that nobody ever uses.
yeah, right. So, um I guess we've gone from the 70s of watching reruns and TV shows all the way up to stuff that is happening now or is going to happen. Something else that's going to happen is the conferences we're going to attend.
Yep. We have, see, by the time people listen to this, we'll have already come back from EIC, victorious and champions of something. I'm not sure what yet. And enjoyed that, I'm sure. And then we've got Identiverse coming up. So IDV 26-IDAC 30% gets you 30% off. Time is running out. If you are looking for that code, you'll find it on our website, idacpodcast.com. Hopefully, we see lots of familiar faces there. We're going to do some podcasts, recordings, and we're doing our Majority Rules game show there. So if you have checked that out at either like Gartner or other CRA events, like back last year, or even if you're at SailPoint Navigate, that was when I first debuted it as sort of like a test run and it went really well. So it's a lot of fun. Everybody gets to play. You play on your phone. I kind of MC it with Jim up on the stage, and we have prizes. So far, the only prize that I can announce so far is the top winner, and there can be multiple winners, and there will be, gets a free pass to next year's Identiverse conference. So that's a nice little thing that CRA is hooking up with. So shout out to Shirley for her help with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Even if your employer is normally going to pay for you to go, I'm sure they'll be happy that you can say, hey, we don't have to buy a pass, or maybe we can send somebody else. And of course, if you're paying it out of your own pocket, so if you have to pay out of your own pocket, I recommend you go to Majority Rules and try to win the darn thing.
Yeah,
Besides that, we're going to have other prizes too.
yeah, we're trying to source other things. So stay tuned for that. But hopefully, people come out and check that out. Before we get into today's discussion, which is going to be a mailbag episode, I do want to remind people about our idpro.org/IDA website. And I want people to know about it, but it also gives me a chance to try out fancy graphics on the screen. So for people who aren't familiar, this is something we talked about over the last couple of weeks. You've seen it maybe on LinkedIn, but for the first time ever, we have a discount for IDAC listeners and really anybody who can take advantage of it. But if you go to idpro.org/IDAC, all new members signing up for their membership will get $25 off their first year. So very cool that IDPro is continuing their partnership with us. We're the official podcast for them, and obviously, you and I are big supporters of the organization, and take part in it in various ways.
Yeah, I mean, anything we can do to encourage people to go and join IDPro. And if you're not sure, they have a lot of resources on their website that are available free to the public, like the body of knowledge. So go out there, check that out. But really consider, supporting the professional association for identity practitioners. This is, I mean, in my book, maybe it's the only it's the only one I think about. Go ahead and support them, become a member. It's not just a donation either, right? You get a lot out of it. They have the Slack channel, things like that. Um, the other thing I wanted to also say is just, CRA and Cooper and Cole, they've done a really good job of, supporting the podcast and, making sure that we're able to go to their conferences and we have places to set up and do the podcast. And, without their support, it would be much harder for us to kind of bring that inside view of what's happening at the conference to the people who listen to this podcast. And I think since we've started going to conferences and recording on site, and we've been doing it like 3 years now, not everybody can go to these conferences, right? So hopefully we can bring a little bit of flavor of what it's like to be there to the folks.
Yeah, live vicariously through us, or as vicarious as we get anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's get into kind of the chunk of the episode here. We got a lot of questions. We're going to try and get through up to 5, but we may skip a little bit for time just to kind of keep this reasonable. But let me start off with the first one. This one is from Isabelle in Amsterdam, one of my favorite cities based on my trip last year. So shout out to Amsterdam. Uh, with so much IAM vendor consolidation happening right now, how should practitioners think about their existing stack? I feel like I just finished an implementation and now my vendor is being acquired. How do you evaluate whether to stay, migrate, or wait it out? This is a very timely and excellent question. Jim, do you have thoughts on this one?
Yeah, so I think, one of these types of questions, it's all about the context and all about the details of where you're starting out. So I'll take Isabel's question and pull it apart. One of the things was we just finished the implementation. So there must have been something that drove you to the product. Usually, I think the biggest things that drive people to products is they're impressed with the product, but they're also impressed with the leadership of that vendor organization. So maybe you got to meet people who are like the CEO and CTO, but also your account manager and people who you're going to support you going forward. So let's make the assumption you have done that and that you have some trust in them. Obviously, you also thought the product would do a good job in terms of supporting your use cases. So I think acquisitions are either inevitable or they're always a risk that you face in this space. I mean, my original starting point in identity was implementing a technology called Oblix. I mean, it got bought by Oracle not very long after we finished the implementation. It turned out to be a good thing and, for a couple of years. Eventually, we wound up changing horses and going with a different technology. I think in this space, you almost have to assume that's going to happen. Um, but I wouldn't try to take evasive actions just based on the fact that your vendor that you implemented got acquired. I'd say let the dust settle, see are they going to be as supportive? Did they fire all the people from the organization or are those people maybe playing important roles going forward? So I think context matters in this type of situation. What do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, I think you're kind of thinking the same thing I was thinking is, okay, things happen. Let's figure out where we go next. In my experience, it takes a good 2 years, even after an acquisition has started, or even, officially closed, I guess would be the right way to put it, for really anything to happen. Um, so you've probably got some runway to your next step. Maybe it's staying there, maybe it's not. Look, you're the customer. Make your feelings known with, the company of what your expectations are. It's on them to keep you as a customer. Um, I understand that, pulling technology out might be tough, but things happen, and that'll be another question that we'll be talking about, later here. But you've got time to think about it, and use that time to think about what your next steps are and game plan, and figure out, okay, well, let's say this thing doesn't work in 2 years. What's our roadmap off of this? Or maybe things are going well and it's okay. Yeah, we're fine, right? You kind of want to be like Littlefinger. You're fighting every battle everywhere all at once. You're not surprised. I love that quote, despite him being a horrible person. Um, and that's kind of my thought process on it. Where you'll get your biggest sense of how things are going is the people. If you start noticing people that you've been dealing with leaving the new organization, that is a warning sign to start thinking about. I've bought products that have been acquired, and new salespeople show up and, hey, we're here to assure you, and everything's going great. And then I never heard from them again. And guess what? That product was, pretty much butchered and gone a couple years later. So I would keep an eye on the personnel, the people that you've grown, hopefully, to like and trust at your vendor. If they start disappearing, that is a warning sign that, maybe things are not going where it needs to go. And you should definitely make your voice heard as a customer to make sure whoever your vendor is, that they're aware of it. And they need to be keeping you as a customer. You don't need to keep them as a vendor. You need to keep them. They need to keep you as a customer.
That's right. And if you think about the motivation that companies usually have to acquire another vendor, it's like, hey, they want to acquire the customers. They don't just want the technology. Oftentimes it's about getting the customers. I would say that's probably the large majority of the instances is like, hey, we have a total cybersecurity offering. If we go and acquire this technology, that makes our footprint more complete, but we also can sell into them more things. So I think that just kind of supports the point that you're making, which is, you know, they need to keep you as a customer. In fact, they probably want to grow your relationship. So the other thing I would say is I just thought of this as you were talking, like, go ahead and ask the blunt questions. Like, you don't have to beat around the bush. Just ask them, like, hey, I talked to another one of your customers and they said that they had these support issues and you weren't, if this is true, right? Don't make up issues, but they said that, they got the runaround. Like, what are you doing about that? Like, how can I be sure that that's not going to happen to me? So I think you can be very blunt with them. And I'm talking about being very blunt with the new management too.
Yeah. I, you bring up something that I also want to think about is what is the motivation for the acquisition? And you talk about one, right, is buying customers. Sometimes it's actually for the technology and they want to get into that technology space. And, maybe there's patents that you can't get around and, somebody's done a good job of kind of building the technology around it. But, especially when I will kick down the fourth wall, right? Especially in consulting, when you see another consulting firm buy another consulting firm, they're usually buying that consulting firm's book of business, meaning their customers. The
Absolutely.
people who are doing the work are sort of kind of coming along for the ride, and the hope is that things work out. But generally speaking, at least in the consulting and the services industry, you know, we work for one, right? We're always looking to grow, the services that we do. That is an area where you want to be concerned about because sometimes that causes some challenges.
Yeah,
Technology is very
100%.
similar, in addition to the fact that not only do you want to buy the book of business that that the new technology firm acquiring the other technology firm, you're getting access to them from their customer standpoint. But there is also the added, like, yeah, maybe they actually do have a good technology, and it does make sense for them to acquire. It'd be weird if like some technology firm, I'll say like Microsoft, went out and bought something that had nothing to do. Well, Microsoft's not a great example because they do so much. But let's say an IGA firm goes out and buys something that's like totally unrelated to identity or security, right? They get into like making hamburgers. Like, okay, what is the point of that, right? So the motivation is a great angle. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, no, and I agree 100%. There's not a whole lot to add, but it did make me think about being
But
on
you're going
the
to add some.
well, no, I mean, a different angle, which just really doesn't answer Isabel's question at all. But if you are in a consulting firm or in a tech firm and you wind up being acquired, right? So now you're the person who's going to have a new employer. Sometimes you get messaging which probably doesn't align with reality. So, in thinking of like, hey, they bought that book of business, but they're telling us that, yeah, we made this acquisition because we want the people. Um, and I'm not saying it's never true, but they could just hire the people, right? So, um, yeah, it's something to think about. I don't want to go on here
You
and
and I
like,
have some experience in this space, so I think we'll just leave it at
yeah,
that. Try
yeah.
to understand the motivations. Keep an eye on the people around the product that you picked, whether the product is actual product or services, but also take a look at where does it fit strategically for the acquiring company. Like, what do you think their plan is going to be for it? And yeah, be blunt. Ask the questions. Like, refreshingly, I love it when people just ask me straight up instead of beating around the bush. Like, okay, well, here's the answer, right? Let's have an honest conversation around it, and hopefully you'll get an honest conversation. But bring up some good points there. All right, let's get to question number 2 from, I hope I pronounced this right, Rajan, from Mumbai,
Raj.
India. Raj, we'll shorten it. We are seeing more and more attacks that use AI-generated deepfakes to bypass identity verification, especially during remote onboarding. Is this a solved problem, and what should organizations actually be doing to defend against it? I will point Raj to a previous episode that we did earlier this year around the reports, kind of analyzing the Q1 sort of identity reports that were out there. And I think was it Hyper that had like the one that was like 70% of their customers or something had already seen a deep fake attack. And I was kind of blown away by that number. But that leads me to believe that this is not a solved problem. But what do you think, Jim?
Well, I think the issue is when you're doing this to scale. I mean, that's where it becomes where the deepfakes might slip through the cracks. Um, but it's a very real problem. I think it used to always be like, hey, this is what might happen in the future. But then you hear about people who wind up getting jobs, and really it's just a backroom office of people doing the work. And it seems like you have a legitimate human being. I think it's an arms race between the identity verification software, which is required to do this at scale, and the deepfakes that could come along with it, and identifying those. I also think that if that's all you're going to rely on is the arms race, that means you're going to lose some of the battles. When you lose some of the battles, it can be very costly. So I don't think you can accept just relying on technology identifying or flagging deepfakes. You're going to have to also rely on, process and people. So having a process where you have fail safes or, people checking work. You'll have to also educate people to what to look for. It's just like phishing, right? You have software that takes phishing emails, and you're getting millions of emails a day. And if you didn't have software that tried to catch the phishing emails, you would just have an inbox full of junk mail, right? So it gets those and it quarantines them, but still some get through the cracks, right? And now you're relying on people and process. So it's like the people like hopefully identify like, hey, this looks like a phishing email. And then the process becomes they're supposed to report that. So the cycle becomes they update the software. And I think it's very much the same kind of operation here. Like you need the technology so you can do hiring at scale. Hopefully it catches most of the deepfakes, but you need to have a backstop to that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think this is so much a technology problem anymore. I think there's plenty of solutions, out there that will help with identity verification, whether it's document or liveness detection, right, or things like that. Will it catch everything? No, but I think this is where the layers come in, right? If you have multiple steps as part of your identity verification process, now you've got a fighting chance against it. Again, I don't think the problem is technology. I think the problem is we haven't made investments yet holistically as sort of like a collective we, meaning everybody, to implement identity verification into our processes, whether it is authentication or calling a help desk and saying, "Hey, this is Jeff. Reset my password." And guess what? You just got social engineered, because that's still the number one way that people are getting breached and have account compromises. It's not the technology. What we did is we didn't buy the technology yet. Technology exists. We just haven't got it into the enterprise budget cycle to say, okay, this year now we're going to set aside some money to do identity verification. For the last few years, if it was working on identity, you were probably working on privileged access management or IGA, or before that would have been like MFA, right, and authentication with people working more remote than they had ever before. It takes a time for enterprises to catch up with the cycle. Unless you're a well-funded, maybe you're in a high risk, high regulatory environment like bank, finance, education, healthcare, right, things like that, government, right, where there are more reasons to do it sooner. It takes time for that, the rest of us to kind of catch up. So if you don't have identity verification on your radar as a technology investment, you probably should be looking at that sooner rather than later. I don't know if you need it right this second. Only you can decide what that means, from a risk perspective for your organization. But tools are out there. We've had many on our show. A lot of our sponsors, play NetSpice. Go back and look at some of those episodes. But it is, in my mind, it is a solved technology problem. It's not a solved implementation problem, because there's just not enough people using it. Does that make sense, Jim?
Yeah. I I want to follow up on something I was talking about, which was kind of this framework of having the backstop. And I've been a kind of a vocal critic of user access reviews, identity governance as like, okay, well, if you're doing things right, then sending out a bunch of reviews to people to go through. We had a guest on who called
Yeah, it
it
was Anthony, right?
Anthony Vigiano. Yeah, exactly. He called it security theater. And I was like, dude, that is the quote of the year. Um, I think it can be security theater. But I also think it can have real value. Like the reason we always did it in the past is that the reality is that processes break down. But I think we're in a case here also. I think you always have to have the mindset of like, okay, especially when you're doing things at scale and relying on technology is like, well, what if the technology misses some things? And if onesie twosie getting through doesn't matter, right? It's not that big of a deal. Fine, just live with that. But as far as like you hire somebody who's not a real person, like how many of those can you afford to let slip through, right? So having kind of that approach, I think is important. Um, I also wanted to just point to, I called it an arms race. So what was I kind of meaning by that is I've been watching these AI videos lately. It was like, I like taking a period of history like the Black Plague, and somebody will create this narrative in an AI video, and these things are incredible. Like I am very grateful for the people who put them together, but they're so entertaining. But weird things happen even in these videos, right? So I was watching one the other day, and the person, they were doing something with a broom, and then they turned around and it turned into a mop, and they were mopping. Like and I had to rewind to play it again. I'm like, that really happened. It just like magically turned into one. And I've seen other, I don't know what you would call these things, like blips. And I remember seeing a video where someone was like, oh, here's how you detect fake AI videos. Like, watch this one where the person's sitting there talking and a car goes and then it never comes out the other side. And I'm like, okay, dude, what, in a year from now, that's not going to happen anymore. Or maybe it's not a year, maybe it's 2 years. At some point, the AI video is going to get better, and these modes for figuring out what's fake, like if we're relying on stuff like that, like minor flaws, those minor flaws are going to be fixed, and then the deep fakes are going to get better. The technology has to get better at detecting the small little things. And I'm telling you, when it gets to that, more and more of these things are probably going to get through. Obviously, the technology will continue to get better and the arms race will continue on. But that was a little bit more about my thinking.
I think those are good points. I want to move to the next question because it kind of ties into this slightly, but this one is from Caleb in Austin, Texas. We have a huge contractor and third-party population that touches sensitive systems, and honestly, our identity governance for them is nowhere near what it is for full-time employees. How are mature organizations actually solving this, and where do you start? I mean, this kind of ties into the fact that, do you know who you're onboarding, right? Have you done identity verification as part of that process? And I think this has been sort of a classic example where, organizations have historically done a decent job of knowing who their employees were, but the non-employee population has sort of been left behind. I do think it's gotten better over the last few years. I would say over the last 7 or 8 years, I've noticed a bigger shift where, I'll call like HR departments, right, or their equivalents, whatever your group calls them, is okay. Yeah, there's kind of been the war that was been fought where, human resources only really tackled employees, and contractors and non-employees are like, well, that's the business's problem, and it ended up being IT's problem. And if it was IT's problem, that became the identities team problem to try to figure out how to track these people. I see a better job of HR teams, for using just a common name, of taking those folks into account. Part of it is technology. Now people have modern ERP systems that do support different personas right within it. Licensing has also caught up with some of that. Instead of paying for a full employee license, some of these software vendors also now have light licenses that might be more applicable for contractors or vendors or things like that. So I do think it has been a challenge, but I do think it's getting better. And IGA solutions have been tackling this for a long time. This has been a feature of a lot of IGA solutions where they do have like a non-employee management system of some sort, right? A person can go in and input it. Not as good as getting all your data from one source, but sure better than like a spreadsheet, right, or an Access database or something like that. What are you seeing when it comes to the management of non-employees with an organization? Let's see if we can help Caleb out here.
Yeah, I mean, so Jeff, I'm sitting here shaking my head the whole time. I was off camera, but you and I have worked together for so long. We used to call those one of the holy wars in identity, right? And you rightly pointed out HR groups, and I could sit here and bash on HR because I've always thought, like, if you're not in charge of who works here, then like what's your function? Is it just payroll? Like, do you want to have such a closed mind? And guess what? The reality of like who works here is the future is going to be 90% machines work here. So your role becomes very, very small if you're not including humans beyond the full-time employees or, employees that get a paycheck.
Yeah, what
Um,
is HR going to be called in the future? It's human resources. What is it? Just resources? Is it
it's just payroll.
people and talent, or like all these other crazy names? They all mean the same thing, right? It's like entity resources, maybe.
Yeah. So what I've always thought about this, and I think you're right, like we're seeing a lot of organizations where the HR groups have stepped up and said, all right, we are going to be responsible for this bigger group. And to give them credit, this bigger group a lot of times has a lot of nuances, but them saying that we're not going to take ownership of it doesn't make the problem go away. It just means somebody else has to solve it. And I think it's usually winds up being a team that's less equipped to solve it. Oftentimes it's IT has to solve it. Sometimes it's finance, but they only have a part of the picture, which is how do you give people access or how do you make sure that these people get paid? Further compounding things, every company seems to have employees, right? They all have employees that they make paychecks to. So it's like, how you manage employees and employee life cycle and their access, it's kind of solved and it's the same solution just about everywhere. But these non-employees that are human beings, not talking about the ages here, these non-employees are they're different from organization to organization. So you think about a healthcare organization versus a university versus a government versus, I don't know, you name like a restaurant or something. Some of them have like, hey, the public has to have IDs. Am I sitting here saying that you should put members of the public in your HR system? Absolutely not, right? Like there has to be some line, right? But I think that's what the discussion often becomes is like, all right, well, we can't put those people in our workday. Well, no one said you had to put the people in your workday, but if they break some kind of rule, like they're harassing somebody else, like aren't you just as responsible as an organ as a company in the eyes of the law, whether a contractor did that or an employee did that? So that's why I've always been a fan of saying HR should own the issue, but sometimes it does go and it becomes like, hey, much bigger than just contractors who work for, tech systems or something. I'm not picking on tech systems. They're just often a big company. Within this big realm, there's like different solutions. You've named IGA systems often have special functionality for non-employees. Um, Delegate administration often becomes a big thing when you say, hey, we have a lot of people who work for this big consulting firm. So many people that are coming in and out and they do, they might have to reboot a server and might have to have access. Um, you can't keep track of who those people are. So you turn over that delegated administration function to somebody who works for it, who's outside of your company. So truly in that kind of use case, the situation might be like the only reason we're really managing these people is so that they have access to the systems versus like that true kind of contractor population. But these are all the difficulties that go into it. I'm sorry I don't have like one silver bullet answer. It might be federation. It might be some kind of module in your IGA system. It might be putting those people in your HR system. It might be some combination of all of them. And this is where like applying your experience, wherever your experience is, and pulling together subject matter experts within your company that's where it's going to be important. Sorry, I kind of rambled there, Jeff.
No, man, you got in your soapbox and you preached. So good on you. You put up a couple options there. I think here's what you cannot do. Ignore it. Like if you ignore it, that's just going to become a bigger problem down the road, and it's not going to make the organization more secure. It's not going to make it any more efficient, and it's just going to become a nightmare and continue to become a nightmare. Further evolve as a nightmare, I should say. So you cannot ignore it. Have the discussion, figure it out. At the end of the day, I don't care where where they're coming from, as long as the organization has a plan for it. We know that this set of population is coming from this area, maybe it is federation. Maybe this set of the population will go into, the HR platform or an ERP platform or whatever it may be, so we can track them. Maybe there's part of it is an IGA, right? I don't care. It doesn't necessarily have to be centralized, but there should be some accountability and some ownership over that process. If you're a very large organization, maybe it's not HR, maybe it is like a third-party vendor management team, right? Because you're so large, because you have so many different vendors. But you cannot ignore it. Have the conversation, fight the good fight, document the conversations. I've been there. It took me years in a prior employer to have our HR team finally see the light and actually build into a custom ERP system, there, a module to track contractors. It took years. And in the meantime, things aren't getting any better, but at least start the conversation, rely on your relationships. But if you ignore it, you're never going to catch up. It's just going to continue to be a problem for you.
Yeah. And you know what I always think is, like, you were there at that company, a decade or more ago? They're probably still using that module.
I hope
And
not.
no one
Jeez.
knows, like, that you helped. Like, heck, they'd still probably be fighting that fight if you didn't do that. But that's the way it goes.
I want to hope that they would have figured it out at some point. But, we were rolling an IJ platform, and, it would have been, I guess, late 2000s. And yeah, it was a battle. It's because I was on, I'm leading the team, the ID administration team that was dealing with having to track all these vendors and contractors manually. It was an access database, literally. That's like what we were doing. And anytime you have to manually update something, forget it, right? It's gonna get out of date and problems abound. So the more you can become data driven, the better.
I miss Microsoft Access. That was like what you're talking about with, like, Saturday Night Live. Like, oh, you have, like, some nostalgia for your era. Well, Microsoft Access was in my era.
It was a simpler time, but I don't miss that. I don't miss Lotus Notes. If I never see another Lotus Notes database, I'm okay with that. So let's get to the next question here. I don't know who sent this in, because it clearly had like a fake email address. It was submitted through our form online, and I'm pretty sure Barack Obama is not looking for identity information from us. If he is, hey, come on the show. I'd be happy, to talk through how he got into identity. But let's just call this anonymous, location or parts unknown.
I think it would be a deep fake if that happened.
Probably. Maybe it'd be a good test if somebody can get us like that. Let's see. We're going through an IGA modernization and keep running into the joiner, mover, leaver conversation as if it's solved. In practice, the leaver process is still where we see the most risk. What are organizations consistently getting wrong? My initial thought here is, if you are in an IGA deployment and you are tackling joiner, mover, leaver, typically the biggest gap I see is the scope of what is it that you have connected to IGA. So low-hanging fruit should be a termination, and the more systems you can connect to IGA, the more you can automate a lot of that stuff. Not saying you can automate all of it, but that should be like one of the easiest things to do. And that really just takes time, to meet with the different teams, set up connectors or flat files or however your integration, works for whatever IGA tool you're using. But that is typically the gap I see, is you start off like really strong and say, okay, we've just signed up this product and we've got this services firm that's helping us implement it. And the scope is we're going to do the first 10, and then the customer is going to do take it from there. And then they never do it. And their IGA platform only has 10 things connected to it because they never kept up that sort of factory of connections into their IGA platform. The whole point of IGA is to connect as many things to it as possible so that it can do these things. And that is the biggest gap. It's not a technical issue. It's typically time, resources, and the runway to do it in a timely manner. What do you think?
Well, I heard somebody make the statement recently that organizations usually start their internal IAM with single sign-on, right? And so a lot of times what they'll do is they'll try to take their Microsoft environment and connect apps to that. And they have a good list of users in that. Then they'll go and do IGA. And I think, you know, my assumption would be is like most of the time, Active Directory is going to be kind of a central hub for access. And that's probably the person's most important account. If that's not the case, if you literally just have 100 applications all over the place, I don't think you're probably starting at the right point. You need to start getting, I mean, your IDP platform connected to your app so that you have one place that really, when you shut off that account, it shuts off that person's access. If you're relying on IGA to do that, I don't, to connect to 100 systems, I don't think that's the right move. So if you have Active Directory, that's got to be in the scope for getting that account on or off. You got to make sure that your Active Directory is clean enough that you know that it's got a good set of accounts in it. Um, but then I think you also have to realize that even though AD is going to be then your most important account to turn on or turn off, is two things. One is there's going to probably be some applications that are not connected. And number two is, the major shortcoming, I think, is like two things. One is if it's not being used for authorization, which is the case for most um, Active Directory connected apps. In other words, you use your Active Directory to sign in, but then there's a profile or something within the app that gives you, here's what you can access within the app. And then number two is any kind of accounts that exist completely outside of AD, usually for administration. Those are very concerning to me as well. And that might be more your privileged access concern, but that's where IGA eventually something has to inventory those apps in terms of what accounts exist. So you're going to have all your Active Directory accounts that can access that app, but you're also going to then potentially have like machine accounts and administrative accounts. And you have to make sure that those are being accounted for and that you know about them and that, ideally you're controlling them. So I think that, IGA, like that initial MVP deployment, usually you're starting with like your heavy hitters, but if you think you can just stop there, like you're in for a rude awakening. And by the way, I just pointed out one other thing. I totally agree that shutting off access is the most important thing you can do. So, shutting off the AD access might seem like, okay, now the person can't get to their email, they can't get to the travel system, and 99 other systems that are connected. Great. But if they have those administrative accounts and things like that, darn it, like that person's being separated from the company and they can still cause you a lot of pain.
Lots of pain. And I think there's a little bit of a trap that people fall into with, well, we've got things connected to our SSO. So if we do shut down their SSO account, whether it's AD or Entra or Okta or Ping or whatever it may be, well, they can't access it. So, that solves the problem. Well, it doesn't really solve the problem because there's still potentially an avenue for access. There's an avenue for a license being taken up. So I would caution against, that's a pretty common thing. Like from an audit, I've written many audit responses in my time. And one of the things was, well, we shut down their AD account. So even though they existed in this, other application, they can't authenticate to it. So it's unusable. True, technically, but I feel it's a trap because like you're relying on just that one layer of, the authentication not being there. What if that account gets breached? What if it becomes, hijacked? Guess what? Now all the applications that account had access to, now they have access to everything that was downstream that was just relying on it for authentication. So, definitely setting up for a lot of pain. I get it. These things take time, but don't lose focus. Keep going. And when I say termination, and I would throw this into this as well, is when you're terminating access, it's not a straight up termination. It's also movers. So if someone is changing their role within the organization, their access should change as well. However you do that, whether it's a role or an attribute-based access control or policy-based access control or straight up manual, open a ticket and figure it out. that's another area where, it's kind of like the access snowball that I kind of call it, is we're really good at giving access and really bad at taking it away, especially for people who have been with the organization for a while. Right? They just keep accumulating access, and next thing you know, they're like Thanos with their infinity gems of access, and they can do a lot of damage if someone else gets that gauntlet. I know you appreciate a good Marvel reference, Jim.
Yeah, well, there's analogies to all kinds of sci-fi that come from you, Jeff, and I love them all.
Do you even know who Thanos is?
I think he's like a superhero, right?
No, he's not a superhero. He's a super villain.
That's what I meant.
Okay. Yeah, he's a bad guy.
Yeah.
Well, it depends on
Yeah.
your point of view, which is whatever. But yes, he's a villain in the Marvel universe. Anyway, let's get to our last question here. This is from I think it's pronounced Tomas from Berlin, where we will be in a couple weeks as we record this. We have been running our IAM environment for over a decade, and the technical debt has become impossible to ignore. Legacy connectors, custom code holding everything together, and platforms we have outgrown. How do organizations actually start tackling IAM technical debt without blowing up what is already working? Wow, that is a loaded question. Jim, go for it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is something we all face. If you're in this space long enough, you're going to get to the point where it's like we've either outgrown this system or kind of the vendor. It feels like the vendor's walking away from the problem. So you kind of get to the end of your rope. I think there are some steps you need to go through because look, I don't like to talk about like, hey, organizational politics all the time, but it is a real thing. And if you're new to an organization, it might feel easier to say, hey, we need to rip off this band-aid and just move from vendor A to vendor B. But a lot of times people have been with the organization. They were a part of the original team that picked that technology. And I mean, Tomas's situation sounds like they've been on this platform for a long time. But there are times also where you start with a technology and like 2 or 3 years down the road, you realize that you've either outgrown it or it's just you're not happy with it for one reason or another. I think you have to do your due diligence and show that you were not just pulling the plug because you just were sick of it or you didn't like it or something like that, but that you actually tried to fix the problems, but you still reached a point where it's like, we're just not fixing these problems. I know I'm leaving that very broad, but I think that depends on what your problems are. It's like, what do you have to do to fix them? So I think that's important. But eventually I do think that there are times where it's like, hey, the technology has maybe gotten so old, doesn't have a place in the market. The approach has changed, and these guys haven't changed with the times. Like, for example, the big thing I remember in my career in identity was going from identity management to identity governance. And a lot of the identity management firms tried to just bolt on some kind of identity governance solution that they bought just to make it look like, oh, yeah, we've got all the features too. But it wasn't a well integrated platform. And it certainly didn't say that identity governance was the most important feature of their platform. So in my own experience, having to kind of rip one of those systems out and move over to an identity governance platform was the right move. But you have to kind of show the due diligence of, hey, we tried to make this work, or we looked at their platform offering and we really need to move away from this thing. So that's step one. And then I think step two is like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Look for what are the things that are really good about what you did and try to apply those with your new system, knowing that you're probably moving to a new system because the new system is better. Better means also that it probably does things out of the box in a better way than you've been doing them. So also be open minded that you may need to change some of your processes. You might have you might think you have the best way to onboard people, but this new technology might not be a fit for how it works. Be open minded to potentially onboarding people in a different way. In other words, like a simple process I'm thinking of, like how do you get them their password? Like, it might not be the way you've been doing it for the last 10 years, but that might be all right. It might still be better to X that process. And then there are other times where I'd say, maybe not. Last thing I want to say. So I'm also thinking of the scenario because I kind of like part of my thinking about this question was like, okay, well, what if you had a big legacy system and you built a bunch of custom code to connect all your systems? You might not want to just think about like, hey, we're throwing that away and we're going over to this new system, but you might need the functionality of that new system. Look for a way to bring it in and run them side by side and have a transition path to remove or retire functionality from the old system and move it on to the new system. And then when you get down to the end, it's like the race is on. Like you really have to get the last things moved over so you can shut it down and stop paying for the licenses. I will tell you that a lot of times where I see organizations finally decide to pull a plug on something is like, hey, we've been on this technology for 10 years. We all hate it and they're saying it's end of life in a year. Like, well, if you hated it, why did you wait until like the critical red light was flashing? So I think sometimes, don't wait till the critical red light is flashing as far as like, hey, the support is ending, or usually support doesn't just end. It's like you can have the same support, you just have to pay double for it. Nobody wants to do that. So it's always like, hey, let's get off this system ASAP. I would encourage you, if it's not too late, don't wait until that point. If you hate a system, already start thinking about this and already start mapping out your potential exit plan. I said a lot. That was my last soapbox. Jeff, what do you think?
I'm with you for a lot of that. I think, if there's one behavior that I would love to normalize in the industry, and this stretches beyond just IAM, but just IT in general, is making it okay to rip and replace a product. A lot of times people look at that as sort of like, a career ending move at an organization or career limiting or, whatever it may be. But I think we need to normalize that products change, business needs change, and it is okay to shift from one product to another. Um, I can understand this maybe a decade ago where a lot of software was sold as perpetual license. You had a big upfront cost and then you pay a maintenance fee. Well, guess what? Everybody's doing subscription now. And you're on either a 1, 3, or 5-year term, most likely, one of those options. And so you already have an exit path every time your contract becomes, time for renewal. If the vendor that you're working with is not meeting the needs, figure out where you're going to go next. It has become significantly easier from a financial standpoint to shift contracts from one vendor to another. The money you were spending with product A was a subscription. Well, okay, you still need the capability, but maybe product B does it better. Well, guess what? Now you need you need some money, right, to make the transition happen. But it's no longer this insurmountable. Well, we just spent $7 million on this gigantic IGA purchase, and we're not going to just throw that away 3 years later. You're not doing that anymore. Now you're probably spending, tens to hundreds of thousands, maybe millions for for very large organizations, but that's money you're spending anyway. So I feel like, now is the time to normalize. It is okay to recognize that a product is no longer meeting your needs. I'm not saying don't do your due diligence. Go find the product that meets your needs. Go find and do demos and talk to customers and do all that stuff and show the reasoning of why, you've purchased a particular product. But we got to get out of this mindset of like, well, we're stuck with it. No, you're not. You've got sometime within the next 3 years, you're going to be able to get out of what you have. It'll cost a little money to shift over, right? You're probably going to have to hire, some professional services firm to help you with the transition. And there will be some work, but the good news is you've already done it once. So the second time you do it should be easier because now you've gone through a deployment of that type of product before. So you know what to expect. The first time is always the hardest one. Things will change. There will be wrinkles. I'm not saying it's going to go perfect, right? But it's so much easier now to swap out one product for another, which is one of the few benefits of a subscription licensing model when it comes to software. And everybody's pushing you towards it. If you're on a perpetual license now, guess what? Your vendor is trying to figure out how to move you to a subscription. And so you might be able to stick around with a perpetual maintenance fee, for a while, but at some point you're going to have to shift into the SaaS world. And, that provides at least an avenue to escape if you feel like you're not getting what you need for any reason, from the vendor that you've picked. Jim, you're nodding, and that was my soapbox.
Yeah, no, I think those were fantastic points.
I think so too. Thank you. Let's go ahead and end this episode. Hopefully that helped the folks that we had there. Keep sending those questions in. LinkedIn, our form on idacpodcast.com. If you find us at a conference, come up, say hello, ask us questions, stuff like that. These are the types of things that really kind of get our juices flowing and start to figure out, okay, yeah, like what is, have we seen this before? And if we haven't, give us an opportunity to go research it. And if we have seen it, we can share like what our experience has been through that. So definitely appreciate it. We have a lighter note question from Luca in Milan. What is your most unpopular opinion about the identity industry that you would actually be willing to say out loud? Are you going to be brave first, Jim, or should I be brave first?
Either way, but I will say I think it's unpopular to who, right? I doubt you're going to offend everybody. Some people are going to be like, yeah.
Chance. I'm sure I could figure out a way to offend everybody.
Well, then you go first then.
I don't think mine will. I'm just saying I'm sure I could find a way to do it. But my first one was that normalization of like, yeah, rip and replace. It should not be like a bad stain on anyone's, career that they picked a product and, 3-5 years later, it's not the right product anymore. I'm like, that should not be a thing anymore at this point. So I've already said that one. My other one is for the theater that is an RFP. I detest RFPs. I think they serve almost no value whatsoever because by the time an organization's like, okay, we need to do an RFP for a product, why are you doing it? It's like a procurement checklist somewhere because it met some sort of dollar threshold and there's some sort of governance thing that says if you spend more than $10, you must go and get 3 vendors and you must have them submit a spreadsheet full of answers that they've answered so many different times before that their answer this time is not going to be any different than the 100 times that they've done it before for other companies. Like, what is the value of an RFP? Like, at that point, you've probably already know what product you want to go with, and it just wastes time. And so that would be my soapbox item is get rid of RFPs. I don't see them as providing any value whatsoever. You can do all the work of due diligence of selecting a product, a service, whatever it may be, without an RFP. That is just so completely useless in my mind that, I feel very strong about that.
Yeah, I don't like RFPs, that's for sure. But mostly it's on the side of somebody who's had to respond to RFPs. I've also been on the side of creating the RFP, and I think it can be beneficial to the issuing client where it's like, hey, all these companies are going to take my RFP seriously and they're going to respond to give me all this information. And then
Well,
after
they're not going to take it seriously. They will take it seriously, but they're going to send you the same answers that they've sent to every other client.
could be.
Tell me about your company. It's copy paste. Boom. Tell me about your product and service. We connect to AD. We connect to things. That's all the same information they're saying to deliver. You're not getting anything unique or specific as part of that process. Sorry, I feel very passionate about this one.
Yeah, okay. It's a good one. So I'm going to kind of move on to my controversial opinions. And so it's 2 statements I've heard a million times. So one, I'm going to try to phrase it without using the company name, but it's nobody ever got fired for hiring XYZ. I'm not going to say, but it is a 3-letter acronym. And not even to pick on that company, but just that mentality of like, hey, if I pick this company, nobody's going to blame me. Dude, your job is to make it work, to succeed, not to cover your butt. So if your goal is just to survive and cover your butt, like go work somewhere else. That's one thing that bothers me.
Good one. That's a strong one. I mean, that's accurate as well. I mean, yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah.
I think
And
this is what separates the people who are in this for the profession, the growth, versus it's just a job. That's why the first things I always look at people is like, is identity a career or is it just a job for you? That's going to tell me a lot about kind of how you're thinking about from an identity perspective of how you are approaching protecting the organization you work for. And that leads me to kind of that same kind of question.
Yeah. So the other one that this also pissed me off is like, I want one throat to choke. I was like, join me here in the reality. Like, that is not the way it works. Like, if you have one vendor, that one throat to choke model rarely works out for you. And I won't, so if you're thinking about it from a support standpoint, you might be right. Or like, hey, I've got this one big boss who I can call and complain to, and hell's going to rain down. I'm going to get my issue solved. I can kind of see that. I think that's more the services side. I think on the services side, the one throat to choke model might get you a little bit further. But on the product side, like a big product company, if you think that one throat to choke is going to stop the finger pointing, that's not been my experience. The other thing is usually that one throat to choke model leads you down the path of making a bunch of compromises. So we're not going to look at like all these upstarts because we're going to then have too many vendors to deal with. So I'm just going to take a lesser product that checks the check boxes. And I'm going to live with basically a turd because that way I only have to pay one bill. Like that is, to me, that's like, do your job. Again, do your job. Get the best product for the best price for your company. Now, if you're taking the turd because it's like all you can afford or it's the cheaper route, fine. But if it's just that you only have, one throat to choke, now you piss me off, obviously.
I love it. That's great. I agree with you. I think the one throat to choke only works if you are extremely powerful and I have that throat to choke is also extremely powerful. And even then, you're not going to see immediate change. Especially, what are you going to do? Tell somebody going to call up, Tim Cook and say, "Hey, I don't like the way this thing works on my Apple iPhone." Think about how important you need to be to actually affect that change and how long it'll take Tim, right? Who's on his way out, to affect that change in the organization. Like it's not going to happen soon. And if I were to send that email, it would not get a response and nothing would happen. So I'm with you.
Yeah, those are my controversial opinions. I'm sure I pissed somebody off. There's probably somebody who used one of those quotes today, and they're like, "Oh, that Jim guy," but that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
As long as you hit subscribe, as long as you give us a 5-star rating, we're all good.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I provided a little bit of entertainment with that.
I'm sure people are entertained. We get on our soapboxes sometimes, but yeah, we have opinions. These are opinions are our own. Blah 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 blah. Right. And I'm happy to change the opinions if you present me with facts that are that cause that. So if somebody out there is like, I think RFPs are value, and you can make a legitimate case that changes my mind, go ahead. Give it a shot. I don't think you will, but yeah, you never know. I'm happy to entertain the thought. Hit me up at Identiverse and see if you can change my mind about RFPs.
There you go. I don't think there's going to be a lot of procurement people at Identiverse, and I think those are the ones who would argue for it. I don't think identity people like building the RFPs, reviewing the RFPs, but procurement people is like, hey, we were told this is going to cost $3 million and we paid $490,000. So we just saved the company $2.5 million. They don't understand maybe all the trade-offs that happen. That doesn't make the headline.
Or the fact that you could have gotten that deal regardless of whether you went through an RFP or not.
That's exactly it.
If you came up to any software vendor and said, "Here's my budget, what can I get for this?" They would actually figure out how to work within that budget. Like they're not going to go with list pricing. That's a joke. Nobody pays list price. But if somebody says, "Hey, our budget this year is $200,000 or $10,000," you might not be able to get anything, right? But at least if you're willing to share that information, you will get the deal that you need. Nobody wants to lose on price.
And I'm talking to your top competitor, and
Right.
I want you to come in and like do a POC and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm done. Let's go ahead and wrap it up for this episode. Thank you to those folks who sent in questions. Connect with us on LinkedIn, send them there. Use our form on idacpodcast.com. You can send them there. I guess feel free to use fake emails. Generally, it will ignore most of them, but if I find a good one, I might mention it. So shout out to Barack if you actually did send that email to Identity at the Center. That would be a highlight, at least for me, to get somebody that big to send us something. Let's see what else. We'll see you at Identiverse, and keep an eye on the website for future discounts for future conferences that we're working with. So thanks everybody for watching and or listening, and we'll talk with you all in the next one.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.